Hey everybody, this is video 3 in a 5-part series that I'm doing about chapter 1 in Game Changers for Government Contractors. It's called What It Takes to Win is that chapter. And in this, I talk about several key skills and abilities you need to really win in government contracting. The one I want to talk about today is speaking. And so speaking is one of those things where you're just going to have to do it, whether it's on stage in front of a crowd or one-on-one with contracting officers or giving a presentation to teaming partners or somebody. In the government contracting space, you have to develop speaking skills so that you can actually talk to people, give presentations, and be coherent. That's one of those things. And so I want to give a handful of tips about that today. So when I started in government contracting, I was not an extrovert or anything like that. Even today, that's not my normal state. My normal state is I like to be behind my computer, doing stuff and working on projects and things like that. That's just where I am most comfortable. I enjoy that kind of stuff. I enjoy the podcast and being one-on-one with people. But a lot of times in government, you're one to many. So there's more than one person in the room that you're talking to. It could be 3 to 5 people. It could be a whole crowd of people when you're giving like capabilities briefs and things like that. It's most likely not going to be just you and one other person in the room. There's going to be more than that. And so one, you've got to be prepared for that. So I always tell this story where the first time I spoke at a government conference, I really wasn't used to this sort of thing. And leading up to the conference, I had been speaking one-on-one with contracting officers. And then I'd branched out a little bit into the capabilities briefs where there was me and up to 8 or 10 people in the room and I'm speaking to them and I have everybody's attention and all that kind of stuff. And that was, again, not my natural state. I was so shy in high school, actually in middle school even. I didn't even eat lunch in school till I was probably in the 8th grade. I was just so shy around other people. And now to have to speak for a living in front of people was just not natural for me. And so at the first conference I ever spoke at, I thought I was going to be giving a form of my capabilities brief and this presentation that I wanted to do about collaboration. That was the topic, and about how we all need to work together. And so when my time came, they said, hey, report to this room and they'll get you set up and everything like that. And they said, hey, when you get on stage, and I was like, excuse me, when I get where? They're like, well, when you get on stage, you're going to be out in the amphitheater with, 400 people or whatever it was. And I was nervous, like really nervous. I mean, scared's probably the word that comes into mind. And so they start hooking me up with mics and all kinds of things. And they're like, hey, you're going to have the screens behind you and you're going to be up on this. You'll be on one screen and your presentation on the other. I'd never experienced this sort of thing. And I remember I walked up, and as I'm walking up to the podium, my hand is like physically shaking. Like I can see it shaking like this. It wasn't like sort of shaking. It was like physically shaking like that. And I remember walking up to the podium and like kind of grabbing the podium, and I grab onto it to kind of like stabilize myself, and I started talking. And as I started talking, I could see smiles on people's faces. And then I zeroed in on like the really friendly faces and stuff, because I had some people in the crowd that were not friendly towards me, because we were one of the companies that had a sole source opportunity in the government. We were the only ones that made a certain technology, and there were other people trying to make similar technologies, and they were really frustrated that they couldn't break into our clients. And so they were all in the room. And so there's 350, 400 people, whatever it is in the room. I'm up there shaking. I'm talking to people, and I see the smiles. I zero in on those people, and then I start getting a few claps here or there. And I really kind of forgot about the heart of my presentation, and I just spoke like right off the top of my head. Like, here's really why we're here, what we're trying to achieve, and how we need to work together. And it was kind of like that Jerry Maguire moment, but I was doing it on stage instead of on a paper. And at the end, everybody got up and gave me a standing ovation. And that had not happened at the conference, and it didn't happen again at the conference. And people were clapping and cheering and all this kind of stuff, and I was addicted. Like in that moment, boom, I was addicted to speaking and I just loved it, even though I was terrified of it. And so I was like, well, how do I get better at this? And so part of it is about the preparation. So making sure you're very prepared anytime you give a session on anything. You know what's in your slides if you're using slides. And look, this is a lesson that a friend of mine gave me a long time ago. This is Colonel that I worked for in the Army, Randy Brooks. He told me one time, he was like, Mike, don't put anything in your presentation that you can't explain. If you can't explain it, pull it. And that was a really good lesson there. So if there's anything in your presentation that you can't explain or you don't know anything about, you either research it or you pull it and you don't deal with it. That's a really good one. The other thing is make sure it's short and to the point. So even if somebody allots you an hour's worth of time, focus on 25 to 35 minutes of talking and the rest being Q&A. Make the most out of your time and make it about your audience, not about how much time you can squeeze out of their day, because people will remember that. They absolutely will. They'll remember the boring person that talked for an hour and didn't say anything but their company name 57 times or whatever it is, right? Which kind of leads me to another point. When you're speaking, whether it's one-on-one or one-to-many, it needs to be about them, not about you. So you can't sit there and talk for 30 minutes about your company. There's nothing that irks me more than getting on a webinar or sitting in a session and somebody wants to talk to me about their company for 20 or 30 minutes. Like, this is who we are. Then, oh, not only this is who we are, this is who I am, how I got in the business. And they go down this rabbit hole and you're like, what does this have to do with anything? See, look, this little video here, I'm at about 7 minutes already. And in this video, yes, I've told you a little bit of background, but I've already started educating you. I probably started doing that around minute 4 or 5. And so that's where we need to be when we're doing a presentation. If you want to say a little bit about your company, give your corporate overview and a little bit about that kind of stuff, great, some of your capabilities. You want to talk a little bit about you, make that quick and then move on to the problems you're actually trying to solve for people and get to the heart of it. Don't dance around the subject for 30 minutes. That's also one thing I hate about most business books, which I really like about this book, is most books talk about the problem for 300 pages and give like 10 pages of actual actionable information. We don't want to do that. We want to be the people that you talk about the problem and then you get into how you solve the problem right away. And that's where you kind of lead with that kind of stuff. So another thing is when you're on stage or one-on-one, whatever it is, you've got to be prepped mentally for it. And what I mean by that is you can't just walk up there and just assume that you're going to do the right things. You've got to mentally prepare for having a smile on your face. You've got to mentally prepare for having a good attitude. When I'm speaking in front of crowds, I do have like my AirPods and stuff with me. And before I hop on stage, probably the last 30 minutes before I get up there, I'm listening to music that just gets me kind of excited, puts a smile on my face, that sort of thing. You can listen to whatever, but just something that sets your mood so that your mood is in the right place. And then that's kind of like the foundation, but then the organization mentally of where you're going. Like, here's where I'm going to start. Here's kind of the middle. Here's how I'm going to wrap it up. And if there's any calls to actions or CTAs or anything like that, you've got all that stuff pre-planned so you know where you're going with your session and you can drive that through this whole thing. The worst thing you want to do is ramble on and on and on and on and on. So think of it this way, 3 parts: beginning, middle, end. You need to put it in that type of framework and have some sort of outcome at the end. So like, I like to have, they've learned 3 things, 4 things, whatever it is, but I also like to have at the end, there's some action I want you to take. There's some call to action, even if it's going and downloading a free copy of the slides or going and downloading something. There's a way for them to do it if you're speaking in front of a lot of people. If it's one-on-one, your call to action is more likely, hey, what are the next steps? Maybe it's getting on your calendar for a more concise meeting or something along those lines. But there's some next steps, and being able to talk and ask about those next steps and have that pre-planned is really, really important. So I have a plan of attack on how you go into this. Again, whether you're speaking to one or many, doesn't really matter. Have a plan of attack. And finally, I guess my biggest piece of advice is you've just got to try it and just work on this. I don't use a script. I don't even like using slides most of the time because I like having just 3 or 4 easy bullet points that I can just memorize and talk about off the top of my head. That's kind of how I like to go. But if you like slides and all that kind of stuff, great. Don't write all your notes on a note card. If you do that in your prep so that you can review that kind of stuff. But when you get on stage or when you get in front of somebody, there's no note cards, there's no script. There's you and the audience and possibly some slides. That's it. You need to know your stuff that well that you don't need notes. You don't need a script or anything like that. You got to be able to speak from the heart and from the head and know your stuff inside and out. The other thing that I would say is if you're going to leave time for questions, I would sit down and make a list of the most common questions that you could possibly get asked. And guess what? Include those in your presentation. If you include those in your presentation, like the top 5 questions people are most likely to ask you, they're likely not to ask you those questions, and they're going to dig deeper on the questions they're going to ask you. And so that makes that experience a whole lot better. And it's better for your audience because, hey, you're answering the things they really want to know in the first place. So if you do all this, I think you'll have a great experience about getting better and developing the speaking skills that you need in the government. And look, this is something you just got to try and do it over and over and over again. I remember Tony Robbins once said, when he was starting speaking, anywhere they'd let him speak, he'd go speak. He was speaking as many as 19 times a day. And if he got up at midnight and opened the refrigerator and the light came on, he'd give it a talk. You know, that's how he would do it. Like he was always practicing this stuff. So find ways to practice this stuff, whether it's with somebody else in your business, a colleague, or a coach. We're here for that kind of stuff to say, sure, why don't you go over the presentation? I'll give you some tips and some pointers and you'll get better. And look, here's the deal. You only get better with time. So the longer you do this, the longer you talk, the longer you present about your business, the better you get. So I'll leave you with that there. If you have any questions about this, as always, you know how to reach me. We'll see you next time.